Let me get to just some of my notes, and then we'll take it from there. Okay, here we go in 3 seconds. Let's do it. All right, so Ford Mustang community, welcome back to episode number 111, and welcome back to our guest, John Campagna. He's been on the show sharing some of his mechanical wisdom, his acumen and enthusiasm as a classic Mustang owner, and today he's back talking about outfitting the best garage setup. Now, be forewarned, what is best for Jonathan is definitely different than what is best for me, but might match perfectly with what might be best for you. So if none of that made sense, it's totally cool because we're going to talk about it a little bit. Jonathan, welcome back to Ford Mustang, the Early Years podcast.
Hey, good to be here. Nice to see you again, Doug.
I love having that sultry, sexy, low tone, baritone voice on the other side of that. Tell everybody why it is that you are so prepared, just from an audio perspective, for doing a podcast like this. Nobody can see what's going on behind you, but I can.
Yeah, well, we'll just say it's plus 11 dB of 82 hertz. That's what gives you the God bass, and a nice gate and a nice compressor, because I do make music behind me. I have a YouTube channel, JCamp2112. Shameless plug. You can find me there.
Yeah.
And, I've a lifetime of collecting musical equipment and microphones and guitars, and, a healthy passion for something really silly like that.
Yeah. And it is such a great passion to have. I mean, you use the microphone for obviously doing this podcast and things like that, but I've seen your YouTube channel. You are multi-talented. How many instruments do you play exactly?
Well, I play drums, bass, guitar, electric guitar, acoustic guitar, and some keyboard if I have to.
All of them, then.
Sure.
you play
everything in a rock band, at least.
Nice. Well, definitely cool. I like your sounds, and we'll put a link in the show notes so that people can access your YouTube channel as well.
Thank you.
But today I want to chat a little bit about what has been going on in your life in the last. How long did it take you to build your garage?
Entirely way too long.
I know. I've been watching the entire thing go up, but it seemed like it wasn't there, and then all of a sudden it was there. So. Was it any of it prefab, or was it all stuff that was built on site?
Interesting that you've noticed the incredibly warped timeline on that.
It was pretty good. And nobody knows what we're talking about, though. So maybe just share a little bit about what happened. Is it your backyard, your front yard, your side yard, or not on your property?
Yeah, so this is in our backyard. We're sitting here on 5 acres at our home here in Fayetteville, Georgia. And, we've been, amongst other things, my wife has been putting up a horse barn. And because of that, I've kind of been waiting for them to get that all done and situated, and then figure out what the aggregate was left over for the money, et cetera, et cetera. And it was like, you know what? I've waited long enough. Let's put up the workshop.
And quite a workshop it is. So tell us about it.
Well, it's a 30-foot by 40-foot steel building. It's 40 wide by 30 deep. And I've got 3 bays, 3 10-foot doors. And I've got a 12,000 pound bend pack lift in the center bay. I did all the electrical work myself. I actually rented a scissor lift and did bending conduit, which I'd never done before in my life. So, like everything else, I kind of just dive in head first. I'm not scared. Went to Home Depot, bought a pipe bender, bought a bunch of EMT, bent a whole bunch of really crooked looking pipes. And then I finally figured it out. So it came out okay.
So what's your advice to someone that is about to go under or get go through the whole endeavor that you went to set up their entire garage? Now, would it be to do it to the scale that you have done it? Or would it be, you're talking to somebody like me, it's going to be like, hey, just make sure you have the right socket wrenches.
Yeah,
talking to somebody that wants to build a car, from nut and bolt restoration, what you have is ideal. I couldn't imagine it being any more ideal than what you got.
Well, if you look behind me in the absurd collection of things that I've got, bigger is better in my world. But it serves a very specific set of circumstances for what I do and my use purpose. So I actually do side work as well, aside from my day job, being a Delta aircraft mechanic and all that stuff. And so I need a lot of space. And the other goal was I wanted to get all the really nice stuff that I have, the restored cars, inside. Right. And I currently only have 1 bay, the attached garage in the house, and I would keep the Mustang in there, and that was fine unless I needed to work on something. And so then, if I need to pull it out and it's raining or the weather's terrible, right? I mean, it's bad. It's a pain in the butt. You got something nice with nice paint, you put wax on it, right? And then it rains, it leaves spots, and it's a pain in the butt,
right?
At least in my perspective. But so that was kind of the goal there. essentially I have one bay, the farthest bay, that is like the restoration bay, and that's currently housing my 66 Thunderbird that I'm going to be restoring. And then the center bay with the lift is the work bay, and then the forward one is kind of another storage, multi-purpose thing.
Okay, so let's talk about the stuff that you need to outfit to make sure that garage is being used effectively. You can have an amazing lift in there, and you can have all the space in the world, but if you don't have any tools, which is really the purpose of why I wanted to have you here on the show today, because not everyone or very few people go to the extreme. You go by the philosophy bigger is better. And I am a minimalist when it comes to, I'm going to use whatever tools that I need to, but try not to get many more than that because I don't have a lot of room. I live in California. Room is extremely expensive here. So I have my 2-car garage, which I have only my 65 convertible in, but I got a whole bunch of tools in there as well. Mm-hmm. So maybe talk about some of the things that you would say are your must-haves when it comes to putting a garage together, and then some of the things that you could think about if you're going to do a little bit more advanced mechanics.
Oh, wow. What a great question. The must-haves, you got to have a full set of basic hand tools. And this is something we've discussed in prior podcasts, right? Yeah. If we're working on vintage things specifically, you're going to need SAE sockets and wrenches. There's no reason to go out and buy an entire metric kit if you're working on something prior to essentially 1980.
I started at metric, and then when you told me you got to go out and you got to get SAE. Is that the US version?
So that's the Society of Automotive Engineers. That's the United States group that governs. They set the standards and the specs, and they're the ones that figured out the bolt has 18 threads per inch, and this is the thread pitch and the interference fit, et cetera, et cetera. All of those things they come from that governing body of the SAE. Some of it did, not all. There's worldwide standards too, but we're talking about SAE. Sure. when stuff was built in America back in the day, right? We're talking freedom units here, people, not metric. Okay.
Anyway, if you get the metric units anyway, you're going to just lose the number 10 anyway. So just keep moving.
In SAE world, all the half inch is the one that I always lose. Half inch 7/16. I never find those things. At least if you own a Ford. My Chevy buddies say it's 9/16. It's the one that just disappears, apparently.
So one of the things that I realized when I bought my socket wrench set at your advice, and I got a 1/2 inch socket wrench set. Is that right? Am I saying that right?
That's the big stuff.
Okay, so
typically 3/8 is the mid size that you want to go for.
Okay, so great. So I had a 3/8, and I think I upgraded to or maybe it was the what's the one that's the torque? Maybe you told me to get a 1/2 inch torque. I don't remember.
Wrench, yeah, for sure, 1/2 inch.
Okay, yep. So I ended up getting a couple of these, and then I realized that a lot of the sockets weren't long enough or deep enough for some of the stuff that I had to do. So I had to get some extenders, and then I had to get some deeper sockets. Again, I'm talking completely out of my ass here. Does that sound like that is right?
No, yeah, you're right on the money. And the truth is you can almost never have enough different sized extensions. And they make some that are like a 1/4 inch long, a 1/2 inch, 3/4, 1 inch. And then you kind of need all of those in between sizes. Because if you ever have like a really oddly specific distance that you got to stick a wrench into, that can be the difference between getting the job done and just like pulling your hair out. So when I say a full set of tools, forgive me, you're right. I forget about all these other little ancillary things like extensions and wobbles, right? Universal joints, because sometimes there's no other way to get something out other than put a universal socket on there so you can get strange angles. Not everything's going to be a straight shot,
right?
So I always encourage, get creative, and also necessity is the mother of invention, and necessity is also the mother of going to Harbor Freight and having to spend some money.
Harbor Freight, right? It's 20 minutes away from my house. I can't tell you how many visits to Harbor Freight, because there's a tool that I'm only going to need probably once, and maybe a little bit more than once, but it's not one of those always go-to tools. And for me, that tool is I don't know what it's called, but it's the wrench that's almost the ratcheting wrench that has two different, slightly different sizes on both ends, and then it's angled on the head, and they come in colors. And it's one of those things and you can flip the different ways that either to loosen or to tighten, of course. Yeah. And that's one of those tools that I don't need all the time, but man, to have the right tool for the job, holy shit, the difference between having the right tool and having the wrong tool is skinned knuckles, really hurt elbow, and a backache that it will never quit because you can't get quite the right angle in there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, again, if we're taking it back to basics, when I say full standard toolkit, you're going to need 1/4-inch drive sockets, everything from, a 1/4-inch small to 9/16 in deep and shallow. In 3/8, you're going to need approximately the same thing. They usually start at 1/4-inch and 3/8 drive, and then they go up to typically 1 inch. So you have every fractional size in between, and you should have it in deep and shallow. And honestly, it's not a bad idea to have doubles of these, because sometimes you have to use 2 deeps to get a nut and a bolt out somewhere, or 2 shallows because you don't have the space. And this is really when budgeting gets important. And this is also why I always recommend that Harbor Freight is not a bad place to buy tools. And I know I've said this before, and I sound like a broken record, but it's I believe there's a lot of validity to this. The tools do not make the man. Okay, you make the tools work. Okay, they might help. There might be some minor differences that, maybe 1 in a million shot, like a socket doesn't fit in some spot. That's what all the Snap-on guys tell me anyways. Our sockets are so thin wall and blah, blah, this. I'm like, dude, I've never had a scenario working on an airplane where I said, gee, I really wish I had that thin wall Snap-on socket, right? But your Snap-on man is very thankful for you putting his kids through college.
Oh my gosh.
Okay. With what you spend on the truck.
Well, it's not, you're not kidding, because I looked at just the difference in some of the torque wrenches. It was anywhere from 75, 80 bucks or whatever, all the way up to hundreds and hundreds of dollars. And then they had, is there any reason to get first of all, maybe explain what a torque wrench is.
Sure.
And then, is it important to get one that's a digital torque wrench? Do you need that, or do you not need that? So talk to me.
Well, so when they say the word digital, digital can mean 2 things. You can either have an actual digital display, like something with an LCD, but also they make digital torque wrenches that literally had like digit wheels on the inside.
Right.
You see through a little magnifying glass. As far as torque wrenches go, for trying not to sound like a hypocrite, I do own Snap-on torque wrenches. I bought them when I first started at Delta, and they were relatively cheap back then, but I spent quite a bit of money on those. And reason being, when you have to do something critical that has to be torqued, and I was working on general aviation airplanes on the side, and that's kind of what I bought those for, because that's where it really matters. On your car, man, if your torque wrench is accurate to within 10 or even 15%, you're pretty much there, right? I have used some Harbor Freight torque wrenches. Some of them are okay, some of them not so okay. I would maybe try to find something like in the Craftsman range, because I got a Craftsman that's almost 20 years old, and I've taken it to work and had them check it on the torque meter, and it's still bang on, right?
So maybe can you share the purpose of a torque wrench? Because I think that
yes.
A lot of people don't even know. I mean, before I talked to you, this is probably going back a year, maybe even 2 years ago, I had no idea what the purpose of a torque wrench was. I just thought, hey, look, you just put your lug on, you just crank it down as tight as it goes, and that's the end of it. But I think is it something different than that?
No, you've nailed it in the essence of what that's about. When it comes to like your lug nuts, I'll touch on that, and then I'll get back to the question.
Okay.
The human body with a lug wrench that's about 2 feet long, you probably are putting 150 pound-feet of force on those lug nuts, which is essentially where they get torqued anyways.
Right.
But for those who don't know, a torque wrench is typically a calibrated, very specific device that applies torque to fasteners. And if you didn't know, Guten tight with the calibrated elbow is not really good enough for some things. Tight. Okay. A specific example would be head gaskets. When you put a cylinder head on a car or, on a motor, there is a specific amount of squish that happens when you tighten that head and that head gasket. And that squish is imperative to get right, because if you don't have the torque even around the circumference of the head and the head gasket, you'll get warping. And if it warps, you'll lose compression. You could get a coolant leak, et cetera, et cetera. So there are critical things that you should use a torque wrench on. Basically anything that makes the engine run, you should be using a torque wrench on. Aside from that, somebody that's wrenched their whole lives, you can kind of tell when you've got enough tightness on a bolt. I'm not always breaking out the torque wrench, but I definitely torque lug nuts. This is the one place that is safety critical where you should break out a torque wrench. And Mechanics will get mad at me for saying this, but hitting it with the Ugga Dugga machine is not good enough. Okay. Yeah. People love to rip impacts with, on torque and on lug nuts. And I always ask, well, how much torque did you just put on that lug nut? Did you put enough? Is your gun actually still tightening properly? Did you put too much? If you put too much torque on a fastener, it stretches too far and it can crack and break. Yeah. And the wheels are not somewhere you want to guess what torque you have. Not to mention, if you ever end up on the side of the road and some animal has ugga-duggaed your lug nuts on, you're never getting the tire off.
I know.
You're calling AAA, you're calling somebody with an electric torque wrench, and that's not acceptable to me. That's the one place where I just always say, man, break out the torque wrench. And if you don't know how to use a torque wrench, they make torque sticks for your ugga-dugga machine. They make these metal sticks that yield when they reach the torque. So when it gets to 115 foot-pounds, it starts twisting. And it won't allow you to put any more torque on it. So if you don't own a torque wrench, buy a torque stick, for God's sake.
All right. So we've talked about socket wrench sets. We've now talked about the torque wrench, and now let's talk about the inevitable thing that I have one of, but I've never used it. But I got it because I thought it was an essential element, and that's the thing called the breaker bar. So can you tell me what a breaker bar is as opposed to those other two things?
You will soon enough. So breaker bar, essentially, wasn't it Archimedes who said, if you give me a lever long enough, I can move the world?
I think you are right.
Yeah. So it's absolutely all about leverage. The longer the breaker bar, the more leverage you can put on something. And sometimes that's necessary, especially if you're working something large, tractors, diesel trucks, heavy machinery. Some of these things have fasteners that are 1.25 inches, 2 inches. And your tiny little 1/4 inch ratchet that's 6 inches long. No, that thing's going to yield.
No leverage. No leverage.
Yeah, no leverage at all. So a breaker bar is essentially that. It's just a long stick. Well, it's a long piece of metal tool that will have a drive on it, 1/4, 3/8, half, whatever size your sockets are. And you just use that to put the torque on it instead of using your ratchets. Because what happens is let's say you got a 3-foot iron pipe, right? And you're like, man, I got the breaker bar of all breaker bars, and you put it on your ratchet, you could potentially strip the teeth in the ratchet. So that's why the breaker bar is a better idea. If you're going to be reefing on something, I'd rather break the breaker bar than destroy my fine tooth ratchet, which I might have paid some good money for, right?
All right. So what other tools? What else do I need to have in that perfectly outfitted garage? If I'm your weekend warrior, the guy that's in the garage, turning wrenches on some simple stuff in my garage, as you know, simple stuff is, can I get some water in the bucket so I can wash my car?
If we're just doing basic oil changes and filters and stuff, basically everything I've outlined, the component that I think that's missing that we haven't talked about so far in the workshop is the importance of a workbench or some kind of work surface. And, when I built mine, I built it out of 6x6 posts and 2x6, boards, and kind of essentially created a wall structure, if you will. It was like I was putting up walls or something, but just turn it horizontal. And, the heavier, the better here. And the reason I say that is because you're going to want to attach a vise.
Mm-hmm. Love my vise. Not even a real big one, but it's just big enough to give me another set of hands to kind of hold down whatever I need held down.
You can kind of never have too big of a vise. I would say buy whatever vise your wallet can afford in size, because doing U-joints and stuff on drive shafts, they're just absolutely imperative, right? If not for anything, then having the anvil and being able to beat the things out sometimes that helps too. But man, the vise is probably the most used tool in my workshop, other than the tools in the toolbox, right?
I'll tell you one of the things that I love the most, and again, I don't remember if you recommended it or if I picked it up from somebody that was at one of those panel conversations that we had. It's that ashtray style thing that's a huge magnet that I stick on the top of my Craftsman toolbox. Man, anytime I have a screw, it goes right in there, because you know what you're going to lose the smallest piece of screw that you can't possibly find. It shimmied under your workbench, or God forbid it went, down a drain or something like that. Man, oh man.
The irony, Doug, is that I'm great at giving people advice, and I'm like, you should use a magnet tray, and ask me if I own one.
You don't own one? Do you own one?
No,
What the hell?
I might have one somewhere, but I don't usually put the hardware like along the cowl or somewhere on the front of the radiator support. And I'm the worst, man,
Oh, that thing is great. I'll tell you, I have a Craftsman toolbox I picked up at a yard sale. I think it was like maybe a $200 one I bought used for $50. And I like it when it's all beaten up. That way I'm not worried about the finish or anything like that. Right on top of that, on the very top, the lid part, I just dropped that ashtray that's got the huge magnet. I picked it up at Harbor Freight for like $10. Every screw that I have goes directly in there. Anything that I have, smart. Any of the stuff that I'm working on in the console of the car, when I was taking off the instrument cluster so that I could get behind there to change all the bulbs and everything, there was probably 20 screws in there. And so I just dropped each one of them.
Yeah. Yes, there is. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Oh, man, that was the best thing ever. Changing the bulbs, just knowing right where those screws were. And it was great changing the grill out. I had a 66 grill. I changed it back to the 65 because I have a 65 convertible. Yeah. It's looking great with that honeycomb grill. There's probably another 8 or 9 or 10 little screws in there. And without that little ashtray thing, that's the magnet. And it's a strong magnet too.
Very strong. Yeah.
That's good. The good stuff. Yeah. All right, let's keep moving. What else do I need? What other tools? I got the vise. I got the socket stuff, breaker bar, torque wrench. How about screwdrivers? Do I need any kind of, I mean, what's your thought about that?
Yeah, I would just, so Summit Racing sells a screwdriver kit, and they always do. It's like around holiday time, and it's like $25. It comes with like 40 or 50 screwdrivers. I think I've bought the thing twice. I've got a drawer full of like mismatched colors because they change the color every year. But you don't got to go crazy in this regard, right? Maybe you want a ratcheting screwdriver if that's your thing. I don't find I ever really need it because I usually use a drill if I'm going to do something like that.
Yep.
But yeah, definitely a full set of screwdrivers, right? Number 2 Phillips, at least probably the most used everywhere. Some slotteds. Just buy one of those kits. Go to Lowe's, Home Depot, just buy a screwdriver kit. That's really easy. We don't got to worry about that too much. I would say for wrenches, I really prefer ratcheting wrenches. They're definitely nice to have, but I would also have at least a cheap set of just regular non-ratcheting, because sometimes you're going to have to put some force on some things. And I always worry about breaking the nice ratcheting stuff because it can happen. Right.
I bought the at your advice again. Most of the stuff I do without, if I don't ask somebody that's a professional, I end up buying the wrong stuff and having to buy it twice. That's the worst because you save money on it by buying the wrong thing, but then you bought the wrong thing, so you need to buy the right thing. So you got to go back and buy it again. So yeah, I do have the ratcheting wrenches, and I do have the solid wrenches too. Haven't had or non-ratcheting wrenches. Haven't had to use those at all. But that's okay. I'd rather have it.
It'll come. And we're talking to a vast array of people, and people with vast array of abilities and skill levels and interaction involvement in this hobby, right? So, to the ones that actually do, I find I use both interchangeably quite often. But I also do a lot of work here. Like I said, I do a lot of side work, and I primarily focus on old cars. So there's, I'm taking stuff off that hasn't been removed in 30, 40 years. Maybe it's put on the first time at the factory, right? So, it's having a full complement will help you, but you also don't need a gigantic toolbox to get started. You could buy one of those gear wrench kits, or the ones that Craftsman sells, the 200-piece starter set, and that'll get you done on 95% of the jobs. And I know I just pulled that statistic straight out of
That's
my
all
head.
right. That's all right.
But
gotcha.
There's a lot of truth to that, right? That's how a lot of people start, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Again, the tools do not make the man, and I'm a firm believer of that. It really comes down to your willingness to try. Number one, your willingness to screw up, because you're going to. And when you do, your willingness to fix those mistakes. And that's how we learn.
I'll tell you, since the last time we spoke, I think it's since the last time we spoke. I don't think we've actually done an episode since I've made this repair, but I changed out the heater core, the fan. I mean, I did some, in my opinion, it was like, this was a big job. I did change the whole plenum. I did the heater box on the inside. I mean, it was a big deal. And I really enjoyed it. But I'll tell you, I don't know why, but I had a little bit of anxiety as I was replacing and thinking, oh my God, if I totally screw this up, I will never be able to repair this. And my car is just going, I just had envisions of my car going up on blocks and then never being able to be repaired. That's not the case. It's not the case. I'm not saying because I'm any good at repairs, but anything that you screw up, you can always fix. And in worst case scenario, you take it to somebody that knows what they're doing and they'll fix it for you.
Or you just get a whole nother car. I mean, you're never without options, right?
That is true. That is true.
Look, I'll tell you this.
Yeah.
I told you this before. I had to take the transmission out of my 79 F-150 5 times. I had to redo it 5 times because I got it. And it was a custom transmission. So what they had to do was they cut the bell housing off the front because I'm attaching a 4R70W, and you Ford guys probably know what that is. That's typically a Mustang transmission, right? From a later like 90s model. It's electronically shifted. But I wanted to have that in my truck because I wanted overdrive. When you got a 460 big block and you're going down the highway and it's turning 3,500 RPMs, you're passing everything but a gas station. Right. So to get this thing from 8 miles per gallon to 12, which was the improvement, oh boy, a whole 4 MPG, but man, it makes a difference. They cut the bell housing off because they never made it to fit a big block Ford. Well, when they did that, this was the first one that they had ever done that leaked for whatever reason. And I took it off. I even sent it back to Canada once where they had it built and they put it on a machine, and because they have a test stand, they have an engine that turns it and runs it, and then they run it through the gears. They're like, we can't find anything. I'm like, yeah, but you don't have it behind a 460 big block. There's a lot more torque
right
when I stomp on it, moving things. So eventually we found the bolts that held the bell housing on they required sealant. And that was the first time it ever happened to them. But I had to take that thing in and out 5 times. Imagine changing your transmission 5 times. Right? I mean, I was an absolute pro at knowing every little nuance and how to do it quickly by that point, but it was just absurd. And it was just something that happened. And look, you can't let that stuff get you discouraged. I had people say, why do you even do this, man? I just sell it. Like, what's the point of that, right? If nobody ever bothered to try, we'd have nothing. We'd have no technological advancement at all in the world, right?
So I'm with you.
Stick with it, man, even if it's painful.
Totally with you. And, what's really interesting about it is there was a couple of buddies, Brad Newman. I know that you're a listener of the show also, Brad, thanks for all that you do. To help support me in my repairs. Brad was instrumental in me getting the confidence to do the repair myself. And I can't tell you how many times I FaceTimed him on my iPhone. I'm just saying, hey, can you tell me, are these 2 holes? There's 2 hoses that run through the firewall there. I don't know which one goes to the engine and which one goes to the water pump, or which one goes, whatever.
Right.
I'm like, can you make sure I've got this right? Because I'm not 100% sure. And he's got a 65 also. He opened up the hood. He looked at his car. He's like, yeah, that one definitely runs to the firewall on the left side, or the high side, or low. I think it's high and low, not left and right. And
it doesn't really matter, but it's okay.
Oh, is that right? It does not really matter?
Yeah.
Oh, God, if I only knew. I was stressing over that.
The heater core is non-directional, right? It's just a simple heat exchanger. So whatever water goes in is going to come out, and you could reverse the hoses. I mean, there is a specification for it. If you look in the manual, it actually shows which hose goes in the return and all that, but it doesn't matter really.
I'll tell you, part of that repair that was really challenging, if anybody's in the community that is about to do this heater core replacement and the fan and all the hoses and everything, all that stuff, while it's not too easy to put in, it's also not overly difficult. The most difficult part are those freaking cables that go from the controls to the plenum, to that box.
Yeah.
They got those 3 little levers. I'm like, holy crap. That was not easy to figure out how to put, especially with the new one, because it's just not the same exact as the factory.
Anytime I got to work on a environmental system of any sort like that in a car, it's always going to be a nightmare, because if it's not those 3 cables, Doug, later in the 70s, Ford had this grand idea they were going to use vacuum for everything. And you've got these vacuum manifolds that have like almost 10 or 12 nipples on them, and there's all these rubber lines running into a manifold and a connector, and the stuff dry rots as it gets old, and there's vacuum leaks everywhere, man. It's really interesting. I don't know which one's worse. I think maybe I'd rather have the cable. At least when I pull it, I know the cable's going to move.
That's very
instead
true.
of having a giant vacuum leak that does nothing.
All right, two other tools that I have found extremely useful that I've never had until I owned my my Mustang. One of them was, or two types of tools. One of them was that plastic set of upholstery tools. I don't know if you've ever seen those. Man, that thing is the greatest. You don't scratch anything. If there's any worst case scenario, the tool will break as opposed to you ripping the upholstery or the thing behind the upholstery. That is one, and I want your comments on that. And the other is the tools that are just like I don't know what you call them, almost like an ice pick with a screwdriver handle. There's and some of the ends are like, one of them's like L shaped, the other is kind of like a fish hook shape. Those are great because I don't know why they're so great, but so many times I need that tool, and I'm like, man, if I only had, oh wait a minute, I do have that, and I just go and get it. So your comments about those two kinds of tools.
Yeah, so the interior tools, wonderful to have for those reasons. We don't want to damage the interior, right? Some of this stuff is really expensive. So I encourage you to use the right tools. I'm kind of a gorilla and I just get in there and start pulling on the door card, and I probably shouldn't, right? But those tools that you were talking about with the picks, the awls, we call them booger hooks, right? Because here in the South of Delta, I get in there and pull the boogers out.
Oh man,
I don't know, man. You should hear all the colloquialisms that we have at work for tools, but you got to have a set of those for sure. And the Harbor Freight ones are fine. The ones with the odd pick angles, because
$3.
Yeah. If not for nothing, when you drop something in an awkward location, you can kind of get down in there and grab them. You just made me think of something though. If you don't know what a set of hemostats is, you need to find out.
Wait, the scissors with the grip on the end?
Absolutely. The
Those
stuff
things are
that
great.
They use at the doctor's office.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times a nice set of long hemostats has helped me out, because if you're trying to start something or grab something you dropped, the hemostats lock and they'll grab it with some good force and you can pull stuff back out with it. So hemostats, that's a little trick too.
And again, so inexpensive between the booger tools and the
any
upholstery
thrift store. You can find hemostats, right? And in some places you can even find real dental picks, and those things are super hard and they don't bend, and those are really good too for doing stuff like that. O-rings, essentially. Like, I don't know if you've messed with any kind of O-rings, right?
No, but I see that. I see them all the time. I'm like, what am I supposed to use those for? What's an O-ring for?
So the O-ring is used to seal any kind of connection. So like if we've got a metal hose and they decided that they didn't want to use a flare where you've got like metal on metal together, sometimes they'll use O-rings as the sealing device, and they're usually made out of rubber or nitrile or
you
whatever.
Squeeze it and it compresses and then it squeezes closer.
Well, yeah, that's what happens. So the O-ring will sit on the outer diameter, whatever it is, and then as it tightens, the O-ring squeezes the force down, and the O-ring does the sealing. A lot of times they sit in a chamfer that's made on the device, right? So the O-ring is approximately the same outer diameter.
Right.
So to get those out, those little picks are really handy. You can get under the O-ring and dig it out. And if anybody ever does any air conditioning on their automotive, like I do, and every one of those seals
what's air conditioning? I don't.
First thing I put on a car, Doug.
Well, West Coast. Well, I was very surprised. This is my first true long-term summer here in Ojai, California, and just south of Santa Barbara. And while most of the year it's between 70 and 80 degrees, man, the last 60 days it's been in the 90s, over 100. It gets pretty hot.
I mean, it's a whole Atlanta summer here. It's all in the 90s, and the humidity makes it unbearable. So that's, at least maybe where you're at, it's maybe not so bad, but I grew up my whole life in cars that never had AC in them, right? We just had total shit boxes, for a lack of a better word. Okay. And I was like, you know what? I'm never doing that again. So everything I got working AC.
Let's go to some of the big boy stuff. You have that lift in your garage in the middle bay. So talk about that, because I've had these fantasies of having a lift in my garage, which is not quite high enough probably to house a lift, but you never know. So talk about the lift and any other major pieces of equipment that you have. Like, I don't know if you have an air compressor or anything like that. Okay. So talk about all that stuff.
So just to give some background on why I own a 2-post lift, it's a dream for a lot of people, but I've had back injuries before. I've actually had back surgery when I was 18. I herniated my L4 and L5 disc, and I had to have surgery on it. And when you have something like that happen to you and you have sciatic problems, it's kind of life altering in a lot of ways. I experience a lot of pain if I'm doing a brake job and I have to like kneel for hours or even just sit on a stool. The awkward position that my back is in, the muscles aren't there and the disc is really weird. So I have a lot of problems sometimes. And, I've always been a mechanic. I don't have any plans to stop doing that. And I had to figure out ways to work ergonomically for myself. So I knew that I've worked in shops before that had 2-post lifts, and, being able to stand just in and of itself helps me so much. And you don't get that back fatigue and the leg fatigue and everything like that. So I always wanted to have one. And, fast forward in my 30s here, and I got relative stability and a good career at Delta Airlines. And it's like, maybe I could get one of these things. And I did. And yeah, it was just as life altering as I thought it was going to be. It just made working so easy when you're not fighting just being on the ground. And so out in the shop now, I started with a 9,000 pound bend pack, the one that has the hump in the floor. And the only reason I did that is because I have 11-foot ceilings in the garage and I couldn't have anything higher, which it served its purpose, tenfold. I've never had a problem get something up or being able to walk underneath it. But we then bought this 2014 Super Duty, my wife's truck, as she would tell you, right, to pull her horses around. And that thing's 9,000 pounds, right? And not only that, I took it across the scale because I wanted to know how the CG, the loading was, because that matters for the lift.
Sure.
The arms have a specific rating for how much weight they can take. So, people don't think about that, but let's say I buy a 10,000 pound lift. Yeah, the truck's 9,000, gives me 1,000 pound headway. The arms can only take 2,500 pounds at each corner. And I've got 5,000 pounds up front. I'm already at the max limit.
Right.
So I had to step up to a 12K. So now I got 6,000 pounds. Right. But man, the lift, it's life-changing. It's allowed me to continue to be a mechanic and to do what I love to do and do it efficiently and without hurting myself. Cause I do have a day job. I can't be really getting hurt here at the house. So trying to do things to work safer and more ergonomically. And that's the genesis of the lift. So
and you got to get your golf cart, which I saw, or a golf cart. What was that golf cart doing up on the lift? I'm like, what were you working on underneath the golf cart?
Well, so it's an X Delta golf cart. It's actually one I used to drive at work, which is really cool. Delta decided they were going to change over to gas-powered golf carts here recently, and then they sold off the electric ones. And any employee that wanted to buy them, they sold them for like $250. And they're club cars. Those are, top of the line golf carts. And the batteries were shot because we're supposed to do inspections like weekly on the batteries and put the water back in, and oh my god, pencil whip, right? So when I got it,
not like that on the airplanes though, right?
No, absolutely not. Let me be clear here.
Okay, all right, let's make it short.
There's a huge difference between a golf cart and an airplane, and we all know that. But it just needed some batteries, and it's freaking great. But the suspension, there was like no bushings left. They were just totally gone.
That's why it was up on the lift.
Yeah. And, why not? Right. And the park brake was shot from people reefing on it. And, just a couple of maintenance things. You can pick up whatever you want with a lift. That's what's great.
All right. So you got the lift. Compressor. Tell me about the compressor.
So for you folks listening out there in TV land, God, that's goofy. You don't need to buy what I have bought. But I have a Quincy 2-stage 80-gallon compressor, and it's a 240 volt compressor, right? So you're going to have 240 volt power. But for like 2/3 of my life, I used a Craftsman 30-gallon, something that plugs into a standard wall, 120 volt. And the only time that I really wasn't able to do anything was either sandblasting or painting. Because the rest of it, running my air gun, filling up tires, you got to have a compressor. If you're going to have a shop, if you own a car, you just got to have a compressor. You should be able to fill up your own tires. So got the Quincy, which is made in the USA. It's got a really nice warranty. It's kind of like the Cadillac of air compressors. And reason I buy that is because I believe I want to buy once, cry once. So I'll find whatever the best is. If it's in my budget, I buy it. And then I have a lifetime tool. A lot of us screw ourselves by going, I'll buy this cheap one now. I use it for a while. By the time you've bought 4 of them, you could have bought the good one first.
Yeah.
So there's some value in that life lesson there.
Yeah. Sometimes, like I said before, sometimes when you buy the part or you buy the tool and it's a little bit less expensive or even a lot less expensive, if you didn't get the right tool to begin with, you're going to end up replacing it anyway. Same goes with getting quality tools. You get a quality tool, it will last you a lifetime. You get some of the cheapies, it may last you one go round, it may last you a year, and then you're like, why is this thing not working right? So it just get the right stuff.
You find those, and then through attrition, you replace them with the better, whatever you need. And that's why I say, there's nothing wrong with the hand tools and stuff being Harbor Freight, because look, man, it's just steel, right? It's just cast iron stuff. There's really nothing special. But when it comes to things with motors and electronics, that's where you want to look and be really careful, find reviews, ask around, see what professionals use, and consider that when you're outfitting your shop, because there's a million of those things that we haven't talked about at all. It's like, what do I use for power tools, right?
Oh, I was just about to say, talk about the power tools when it comes to like the battery powered. And if you have 17 different brands with each one having its own little transformer and battery and different voltage and all of that, and some last and some don't, it's like, holy crap. I mean, is there a specific, Milwaukee or Makita or Black & Decker or DeWalt? I mean, what do you use?
I have all Milwaukee. I've kind of always been a Milwaukee guy. You really can't go wrong with either Milwaukee or Makita or even Bosch. The point being is, whatever you like, whatever you're a fanboy of, buy that brand and stick with it and stay with their charger ecosystem and their battery ecosystem, because it doesn't make sense to have a Ryobi this and a DeWalt this and a Milwaukee this and have 6 different chargers and 6 different batteries.
Raising my hand, guilty.
Hey, I've been there. Right? I think we've all done it at some point, but at one point I was like, I'm going all in here. I'm going down the rabbit hole. Okay. I'm going to buy all Milwaukee, and they've been really fantastic. Those tools are awesome, man.
Well, I know when I went to buy my what's green? I forget what green is.
Ryobi.
Wait, is there what's Makita? Is that
Makita is green too?
I think it is Makita, not Ryobi. I have had Ryobi stuff, but Makita I use for because I use my battery power drill a lot, and I'm like, I'm just going to get the best one that I can get. It was a couple $100 by the time I had all the accessories, and then then I get I had a PVC pipe issue in my backyard, and I go over to we have a sprinkler system in our backyard, and I was trying to do some repairs, so it didn't cost me $1,000 to get the guy out to fix it. I'm like, I can do this thing myself.
Absolutely.
So I go to Harbor Freight, and then they have this Hercules system, and I should have just bought the Makita to go along, and then I got sucked into the whole Hercules process here. Now I'm like, now I have these 2 things. And then I had to buy a weed whacker, and I'm like, but I really like this Black & Decker one. It's really good. And then I bought the Black & Decker 20 max or whatever that was. I'm like, I've just done what I said I will never do again, because I used to have everything under DeWalt, and now I spread it out again. I'm like, no, get all the same. Do the best you can to get the same stuff if you can.
They make, because a lot of these companies make a compelling product. So a lot of it's you're like, let me give this a shot, right? Especially a lot of these one-time use things that you get. I have no problem with you going buying the Hercules, whatever. I'm going to use this thing twice. I'm not paying $500 for it, right? I'll buy the $60, and if I get through it, great. If not, just return it, get another one,
Totally hear you. Talk about storage for a second. Toolbox, wall-mounted cabinets. What do you have in your garage? All of the above. What do you have?
So currently, there's nothing in there.
I saw that. I'm like looking. I'm like, I don't see anything at all.
Yeah. So a lot of things have held this up, and the floor mainly is why I haven't done anything. And this is something we all got to think about here when we build our shop. And I wanted to make sure to bring this point up. I've spent a pretty decent amount of money on the concrete, because number one, it's got to be safe if I'm going to have a lift. So, I got a 6-inch slab. It's 4,000 PSI, Kevlar reinforced. I got 1 foot square rebars through the whole thing. And I'm looking at it. I'm like, man, this is a really beautiful piece of concrete. I'm about to dump oil all over. And in a past life, I admit to being a slob. Okay. Fully admit. And I might have thought about just letting this thing get all black and stained. And the more I looked at it, I said, I need to put a coating on this. It seems the right thing to do. It's just way easier to clean if you make spills and stuff. And because, I ruined my mother's driveway, for freaking years, just dumping oil all over it.
Yep.
Don't tell her. Well, no, she knows anyways. But, I decided I was going to do some epoxy flooring. So, you go and you get quotes, and the slab itself cost me $9,000, right? Which is a pretty decent price. And the only reason I'm telling you this price is because I got to set this part of the story up.
Got it.
I got the quote back for the epoxy flooring, and it was $10,500.
Mm-hmm.
I called the guy. I said, "Is this a joke?"
You were going to spend $10,500 to protect a $9,000 floor.
I said, it's more than the concrete. And this is when I went down the rabbit hole. I did not realize these products were so expensive.
Yeah.
And it really can be, but there's a panacea here. There's a little shining light that breaks through the clouds. There's a guy in New Hampshire that sells this stuff too. And he sells commercial grade stuff. So it's nothing that's got a marketing team and a really nice package and a box and, a website that tells you it's the greatest thing ever. It's literally called epoxy floor coating. Nice. That's it. That's what it says on the side of the can. And that stuff for my 1,200 square foot garage, I bought 6 kits of this. It was like $1,200 for the material. And I bought some rollers and, a mixer, and we mixed it up real hot. And I had it covered in less than an hour.
Well, nice thing about what you had going on is that you had an empty garage that you were putting in rather than one that you had to work. You didn't have to work around anything, did you, except for the lift?
The lift was the only thing in there. And that was on purpose because I knew I was going to do the floor. And, luckily also because it's a new slab of concrete, I didn't have to really do much preparation. Problem arises if you want to do this to an old floor. If you got stains that have been in it for years, if you roll the epoxy over the stains, it could bubble up and even not stick and then flake off. And that kind of be a bad thing. But, for those wondering what this process is like, if you want to do an epoxy floor coating, basically you sandblast it, or not sandblast, you pressure wash it, right? Mm-hmm. And the pressure washing takes what they call the layer of cream off the top of the concrete, because when they come through and sand it, there's a lot of like particulate matter and sand and dust and crud in there, and the epoxy will never stick to that. So you can do one of two things. You can either sand it with an actual concrete sander, which they do rent at Home Depot. It's got these stones that are the equivalent of like 400 grit sandpaper, or you can pressure wash it a few times. And that's all we did. We pressure washed, rolled the coating on, and I let it dry for a week. It's hard as a rock. It looks fantastic.
Amazing. And you did that for 15, 20% of the cost of having a pro come in and do it.
There was no reality where I was going to pay somebody $10,000 to come and put this coating down. And even then, I priced out the material, and then I got some quotes for some people to do the work for me. And they wanted something like almost $3,000 just to come and roll this epoxy. It's like, you know what? It's literally dump it on the ground, roll it around. Man, if I can't do this, I should just turn in my A&P license and never touch a wrench again, right?
Understood.
So we did it. Yeah.
Climate control. Do you know any climate control in there?
It's coming. I ordered a mini split, a 3-ton mini split. So that's a 36,000 BTU, right? And it showed up the other day from Home Depot, and I had the 36K wall unit, and they sent me the 24K outside condenser.
Oh, geez. Okay.
Right. So, I was figuring I was going to have air conditioning this weekend. I was going to sit in there and kind of enjoy it and bask in the glory and, the best laid plans of bison men, Doug.
I'm really curious, when you have all 3 of those doors open and then you close them and you got to fill it with cool air, how long does that take to fill with cool air?
Oh, I'd say a good few hours, maybe even close to half the day, if you're going to remove all the latent heat from a building like that. And that's a great segue into something else. So this steel buildings are cheap, and that's why people buy them, and they're great, right? There's a lot of tangible benefits to that. But the thing that they don't have is insulation.
Yeah, it's a convection oven.
It's absolutely a convection oven. When I was doing the work in the ceiling on the scissor lift, I have a thermometer in there, and it was 108 degrees at floor level. Now, you can imagine what it was like being up at the ceiling 3 feet away from it with the sun beating down. It was at least 120 up in the ceiling. And therein lies the problem. this is a non-insulated building, and I'm going to have somebody come back and do blow-in closed cell foam insulation, which does two things. I think it has an R factor of approximately R14 or R18. It's pretty high, and it also adds structural rigidity to the building. And they will actually give you an insurance break for that.
Nice.
Because it makes it more resistant to twisting and flexing.
What do you? How is it held up to the ceiling? Because there's no other layer.
Well, it's closed cell foam, and it's spray on. So,
so it just spray. It's like undercoating for your car.
That's absolutely. They basically paint the insulation on it. And here's the thing: it looks terrible, right? It looks pretty ugly. If you look up some pictures, it's not the nicest looking thing in the world, but it's one of the best ways to insulate it, because the other thing with a steel building, there's a lot of gaps. There's a lot of holes. It's not exactly watertight or airtight. And what the spray-in foam does, it gets in all those little gaps and seals them entirely. And that's the other benefit too. So that's on the long list of things, but it is coming.
Well, you have attic fan. Will you have the ventilation fans left and right, or through
I
the
should have done that, and that would probably help. But I always knew I was going to go into this thing and have air conditioning. So, once the insulation's in, it should work pretty decently, I think.
Man, I'm excited for you to now you're already working on your, did you say a 65 T-Bird? What do you have?
66 Thunderbird, which I used to own one in high school.
Exciting. It's going to be great. And I know you're, when will you be working on your first project with your Mustang?
The Mustang doesn't need anything and hasn't for a long time. And that's a really weird place to be, Doug. I don't know what to say about that.
Any opportunity to put in a paint booth in the third bay in your garage?
Oh, that's quickly and easily done. They make tents that you can buy on Amazon that would be the correct size, and you can just put it up in a day. They stick together with poles, and you put the canvas over it, and yeah, you could absolutely paint in there.
Well, as always, Jonathan, you are a wealth of information, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate your knowledge, your wisdom, and you being in the community. And I know that why don't you give a little shout out or a plug for your Facebook group as well, if you're still administering that?
Yeah, I'm actually wearing the shirt here.
Look at that
point.
Yeah, nice.
The vintage Mustang 6 Forum on Facebook. Even though I no longer own a 6 in my Mustang, I'm still an admin there, and I still think they're the coolest little motors ever. I've always had a soft spot for straight 6 Fords, going back to old Ford trucks and stuff. So it's a great place to be. It's a great community. I think we've got almost 8,000 plus members now, which is really incredible.
It's crazy how quickly. I think there was 5,000 when I first joined, or something like that. And the group size has really blown up. Speaking of which, I have been amazed at my Instagram community. When I first started my page, of course, when anybody first started, I had 0 followers on that. We are just today, as of the recording of this, going to be close to 50,000 people in my Instagram tribe. And
that's incredible.
It's been ridiculous how many people love, especially the photos of any type of fastback. Fastbacks are everything.
Classic.
I know, the
absolute classic.
I mean, you own a coupe, I own a convertible, and the fastbacks for me are, maybe at some point I will have one. I don't have any desire right now to put a second car in my garage, but you know what I do want? I wanted to talk to you about this too.
Tell me.
I've told you this before, and I just haven't gotten to the point where I've pulled the trigger on it. I want to get an early or mid 70 something Ford truck.
Oh, we did talk. What are you waiting, Doug? I'm your boy. Holler at your boy, man. I'll find you one.
I know.
I'll find you the one.
I think that Dan Neves with Mustangs on a Mission put me in touch with a guy that he knows. I think he was in Milwaukee or somewhere, Michigan maybe, and they have a whole bunch of connections with previous Ford owners in like Montana or Wyoming. For some reason, that's where all of those are located. Does that sound right? Does that sound right?
Yeah, in some farmer's field. That's why.
Exactly. And so, between 10 and 20 grand, they've been able to put together some amazing show pieces for me to look at. I just haven't pulled the trigger on anything yet.
Would you buy one fully done, or would you buy one that needs work?
Well, it depends. How much would I pay for one that's fully done, and what year? Because you recommended a mid 70s, didn't you? Is that what
I do? Yeah, if you want that body style, the dent side, which is what I have, the 73 through 79, I would tell you to prefer 77 to 79, because there were some mid mid-production changes, things that are like specific to some of the electronics and in the column and things that were fixed by 77. So not that the older ones are bad. They're all like so incredibly similar, but I would look at an 8 or a 9 if I was looking for one. And that's the best looking grill, the best looking lights with the square headlights. Although I have a real soft spot for the 77 grill with the amber turn signals above the lights. I love that too. I would own one of those in a heartbeat.
I mean, there's a couple of neighbors right here in California. There's a ton of these old pickups in Cali, and 2 of my neighbors have mid 70 something. The one I really like, though, I think this is what I kind of have my heart set on, is the one that's got the little extended cab. So it's got like another bench. I guess that's a bench in the back.
Yeah.
Not another door, but just enough to maybe lean a seat back, or I'm 6'4", so for me to have a little bit extra room to push that seat back way back. So is that something? I mean, like, what would something like that go for at mid 70s? Fully done.
It depends on where you are. Number one, depends on where you find it and what condition. Man, these trucks now in good condition for a 2-wheel drive are at least $10,000-$15,000. If it's 4-wheel drive, you're looking at like a minimum of 20.
I don't think I need a 4-wheel drive, only because I'm not using it necessarily to haul a lot of big stuff, and I don't have any snow where I am. So it's like, I don't know if I need it for the 4-wheel, or I'm not going 4-wheeling. I just like it because of the look, and I like to throw shit in the back of my truck. Rather, I have a 2011 Highlander with 180,000 miles on it. It's not going to last. It will last a long time, but it's not the kind of thing I want to throw like
a sheet of plywood.
Exactly.
Yeah, for instance. So the great debate, Doug, the snobbery, if you will, the snobbery in the old truck world, where people are like, oh, it's not a short bed, so it's not worth anything. Oh, short bed the world, man. Yada yada. Yeah. Every time I go to Home Depot and I throw a full 8-foot sheet of plywood in the back of my truck, I'm like, oh, I'm so cool because I don't have a short bed. It's just like an ongoing banner I have with some of these groups, but that's a thing.
Feel free to send me any shots, any links, anything of something that you're like, hey, I got a guy, he knows he's going to get rid of this truck, or he knows somebody that's going to get rid of this truck. I'm always in the market. If I can find one that I can put, I don't even have a driveway spot for it. Between my Highlander and my girlfriend's car, we take up the driveway. My 65 Mustang's got the whole garage all to itself. I got a spot on the curb though. It would be really nice to put on the curb.
I think I've told you this before, but your listener group has grown, so maybe I could kind of steer them in this direction too. The way I find them is through a site called Autotempest. Tempest, Autotempest. And the reason I use that is because it's a search engine that aggregates like everything. It shows eBay, cars.com, and all of Craigslist as well across the nation. So you can set the search criteria to search the whole country, and then you go to the Craigslist portion specifically. And what it'll do is it'll open like 70 tabs across your browser window. And that'll be all the cities and counties and things that are Craigslist. And I'm telling you, the deals are still on Craigslist. Okay. Everybody that knows what these things are worth, selling them on eBay and cars.com, you're not getting a deal there. They're on Craigslist, because by and large, it's kind of older people that are used to like selling that way with classified ads. They throw this stuff on Craigslist, because even Facebook, like, it's full of people like me, right? Millennials or whatever you want to call me. But that's where we sell stuff, right? So we know what our crap is worth. We're not giving it away for a song and dance. I have found killer deals searching Craigslist, and be willing to travel, maybe, right? Tell the people, hey, I want to come look at this thing. Don't go unless they give you all the pictures you want to see of something. I had a really bad experience where I flew out to Texas for nothing. The truck looked great in pictures. He swore up and down there was no rust. I wasted a whole day, a car rental, a hotel. So find somebody who'll work with you. Ask for pictures of specific things, and there's some really great deals out there if you look, and that's the place to look. That's my little secret.
All right. Well, that is a good one. That will be right in the show notes, autotempest.com.
Yeah.
Jonathan, brother, as always, it has been a pleasure chatting with you. I know we'll get some positive feedback on this episode for sure. And
pleasure has been all mine.
Thanks for sharing here.
Yeah.
Hey, Ford Mustang community, just as a reminder, head over to our Instagram page. Be one of the 50,000 that is in that community now. Just head over to Mustang Podcast, at Mustang Podcast, if you're checking out Instagram. So for now, keep it safe, keep it rolling, and keep it on the road. Until next time.